but Rach Wilson is with me today. Rach, how are you today?
I'm a little tired. It's 5:30 a.m., so I've gotten up just special for this because I'm hardcore like
Yay!
that.
That makes me so happy. But yeah, it's a nightmare scheduling like calls with Australia and the US, Canada and Europe, but Asia, it's like, yeah.
Yeah, but come the end of my day, I'm not even wordsing, can't words.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I
mornings
have
are the
nine.
best for me.
Yeah, so that's good. So it's your early morning, and like my nighttime, I have 9:30. So I'm kind of like already sleepy, and I'm like, I want to go back to my pajamas. So this will be fine. That's a good time.
I'm gonna do most of the talking. It's all good.
That's true. That's true. And it's also a good sign that we're already laughing because our topic today is how to find meaning, purpose, and direction from the hardest hardship.
Yeah, yeah. And I've got a lot of that, a lot of stories.
Okay, so hey, before we dive in, like what the hardship was, like paint me the picture before your, as you called it, your year of hell, your hell year
Oh,
started.
hell yeah.
What was the rage before?
Rage before hell yeah. Let's see. I was working in my business, had a business partner over in the US, and the two of us had a business where we're working with female entrepreneurs, helping them, with mindset transformation as well as their business strategy, manifesting, intuition development, lots of good stuff. Um, we had our son, and things were going okay. I was able to balance my work and him because he had a fairly predictable schedule. He would sleep for 3-4 hours
Oh, bless
easily of an
him.
afternoon. I'm like, yeah,
I can
so I'd
do
be able to
this.
get stuff done. It just made things so easy. And
It
my
does.
next eldest daughter was like 13, so there's 12 years between him and her,
Yeah.
and cruising along and
I
planning
mean, she
for
was a teenager, so she wanted to do her own thing anyway, I
her own
suppose.
thing. And she'd come home from school and she'd take care of Jax, and everything was really good.
Ooh, that
Could do
sounds
that.
sweet.
We had a couple of we had a couple of periods of a few months where he was waking up at night time screaming in pain, but we'd get over those and we'd go for another 6 months or so before another one of those happened. But that wasn't hell year. That was hard, but it wasn't hell year. Um, and then we fell pregnant with our daughter, who was not on the plan. So not on the plan. I'd done so well to that point to have children with nice gaps between them. There was 6 years between my first and second, 12 between my second and third, and then there was
And
going to
then,
be just over 2 years between the last two.
oh, wow. Okay, that's a sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's almost like two under two.
Yes, and I never planned to have kids close together. I was doing really well, but apparently it only takes once, and pulling out does not work.
Oh, surprise,
Um,
surprise.
I know it's what I tell my children, but now I'm the poster child for that in my family.
Yeah. Well,
So,
yeah. I remember that was one of the awkward conversations we had in like biology class, like I don't know, when we were
uh-huh.
like 14 or
You
so.
think I would have listened?
Yeah, 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 you think, but I don't know, at the same time, you sort of really had to numb yourself because you would not want to imagine
Yeah.
our old biology teacher. I
Ugh.
don't know, at the age of 14, he
Yeah.
was not what we pictured. Like we were more dreaming of like the Backstreet Boys and
Right.
like Jared Leto at the time. But so it was
Yeah.
like, no, mm-mm. But
Mm.
yeah, we should have listened. So,
Yes, should have
okay,
listened.
you
So
didn't.
I think we were talking about already talking about having a vasectomy. So I think as a soul level, she was like, "Well, this is my only chance. I'm coming in now." She still
Coming
has
in
that level of
hard.
determination. Like I can see personality from conception, even the journey of getting pregnant with my kids through to now. It's hilarious. So
It's gonna make
Jax
a
has always
really
been.
great wedding toast, though.
Oh, well, the funny thing about our wedding toast. So in the wedding speech, I actually said to my husband, "You're allowed one child and one child only. No subsequent pregnancies or multiple births will be agreed to. One and that's
Well,
it."
yeah, so that didn't work out.
No, because we had our daughter in our 20s, and then in our 40s we went, "Oh, why don't we just do one more? Maybe we'll have our boy," because we really wanted a boy. And we got our boy. And then we got a girl. So we've got
Okay,
our bigs and our
so you
littles.
got pregnant with your last daughter, right? and that almost not even 2 years or closely 2 years apart. Still
Just
had the
over two
business in the
years.
US with your business partner in the US.
Yeah, so pretty much when I went on maternity leave after having Corey, I just couldn't get back to it because I was first in newborn oblivion, which we all know what that's like.
It
And
was
then just,
fun for me. I don't know what you're referring to.
I'm gonna slap you.
I know, no, no, seriously, postpartum was fucking shit. Like,
Oh
I
my
mean,
God.
I don't know.
In my 40s, it was way worse than in my 20s.
Oh
But then at
shit,
the same
yeah,
time,
fair enough. I got in my 30s, so it wasn't better. So,
yeah, no.
no,
40s,
no,
your body doesn't cope with it quite so well. So,
I
and then with
suppose.
Jax, I had a placenta abruption and a
Oh,
spontaneous labor at
yeah,
36 weeks. And
yeah.
then everything went very pear-shaped, and there was a lot of damage done because it was an
Mm,
emergency cesarean that had to happen.
okay, yeah,
So there was a lot of PTSD from his birth alone
I
going
feel
into
you.
having Corey. I was ended up in hospital for the last week before she was born because I had the same pains as I had, and I went into
Ooh, yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, that's freaking you
terrified it
out.
was going to
Yeah.
happen again. Anyway, they were nice enough to keep me in hospital to keep me calm, and then I had her at 39 weeks. So we had newborn oblivion, and then not long after that, Jax had another period of not sleeping.
Mm.
So there's no way I had capacity to do anything during that time. And then we got him good again, probably only for a few months, and I started to get on top of things again, started to feel a bit more normal and coping with. Now, hubby had gone back to work, so I was now finding my balance with these two littles, like
Hmm.
two littles, still shocking. Um, and then Hell Year started.
Ooh,
Hell Year
okay.
started. Hell Year started
So
with my
you
son
started into Hell Year like kind of
in
like
March.
semi fresh, semi balanced,
Yeah,
semi
was just starting to get my groove with the two littles, and I'm thinking, yeah, just a little bit
I can
longer,
do
you
this.
know,
Mama
I
got
can do
this.
this, and then I'll get back to work, and that's not how it worked out.
So
So
Hell Year started when? Like on a
around
chrome.
March 2019, so
Yeah.
pandemic, when the pandemic really started, um, I wasn't focused on the pandemic. That was the least of my worries that year.
Mm.
So yeah, Hell Yeah started. It started with him getting an ear infection. Now, all the way up till now, we've known Jax has a very sensitive tummy,
Yeah.
which is why we've had these periods of
Of the painful
pain
nights.
at night
Yeah.
time.
Mm.
Um, and he would scream for between 10 and 30 minutes
Ah, poor
straight,
boy.
like this poor
Yeah.
kid. And he
Mm.
would have periods of, 1 to 3 months typically, but we had 1 6-month stint before Hell Yeah. And all that time he was gluten-free, dairy-free. I mean, we had him even when as a
Hmm.
baby on Novalax, which is an allergy formula, because he had really bad colic from the time we
Yeah.
got him home from the hospital. So we've always
Okay.
known
Yeah.
he's had some
So
problems.
he has very sensitive. Yeah.
Yeah, so gluten-free, dairy-free, and by this stage he was low carb. You know,
Oh,
we
everything you could
wasn't.
do night nutrition wise.
I mean, this kid was having spirulina in his breakfast and stuff. I mean, I was trying to boost, like, he didn't, he still, at this day, 5.5, has never had chocolate or chips that have flavoring or packet stuff because
Wow.
he's so sensitive. So
Wow.
I always had treated him and tried to treat him naturally as possible because I just knew he was so sensitive to everything.
Mm,
So he got an ear infection, first one in
mm,
his life,
mm,
and I was resistant to giving him antibiotics because of his gut. And so I started on a natural protocol, but I didn't start it aggressively enough because it had already gone too far. So he wasn't
mm-hmm,
responding as quickly as we'd like. So he was still screaming at night time because his ears hurt.
mm,
So my mum, God love her, she was like, "Oh, you really need to put him on antibiotics." And then, then my husband was like, "Well, maybe we should." So then I had the two of them kind of like,
mm.
"Oh, okay," because I hate listening to him scream. So
Yeah, I mean it's not an easy it's not a good feel a pleasant feeling at all. At the same time,
horrible.
I mean, I know that even to this day, like I have a lot of bowel issues and chronic issues that are
Yeah,
in the lower abdomen. Every time I have to take antibiotics, it's like I have to
yeah,
rebuild
I
everything.
know.
Like it's
Yeah, massively, and with him more so because he,
mm,
yeah. Anyway, I'll more.
yeah, yeah.
So I went against my mama gut instinct,
Mm,
and started to give him antibiotics. I gave him 3 doses out of the bottle, and it got
mm,
worse. I'm like, nah. No.
Mm.
So I went back to my natural protocol and I beefed it up and I added a few things.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
And then I had to take him back to the doctor weekly, 4 weeks. I took him back to get his
Wow.
ears checked to make sure that his ears were actually getting better, but he was still screaming for periods of the night.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, well, we've stuffed his gut. We need to work on that. So this went on for a few months. In this time, we worked out that the easiest and best thing for him was to drive him, put him in the car, because the car was a
Mm.
sensory environment.
Mm.
I don't think I've actually mentioned Jax has an intellectual disability. He's autistic. He's not completely nonverbal. Apparently, he's got IBS.
That explains also all the things.
A
Yeah.
lot, which we didn't
Mm.
know until that was what the diagnosis given after Hellier.
Yeah.
And his low muscle tone. I think that kind of covers it. So there's a lot going on in his little body.
Yeah. Mm.
So a lot of intuition has always had to be used with him because he's got no way of telling me. The only way he knows I know he's in pain is because he smacks his head, he bangs his head on stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you can tell his cues by now, right? Like,
yeah. So that was still happening. Even though his ears were healed, he was still screaming in pain multiple times a night. So we would put him in the car because the sensory environment in the car
it's
would calm the
limited.
emotional distress. But then we could see when the physical pain stopped. Now, the other thing was he was sleeping better sitting up.
Yeah. Okay.
And if we put him in the car and we drove him around, then it meant that everybody else in the house could sleep. Now,
except the one driving the car.
Except the one driving the car. So we had a rule. When the second coffee gives out, you have to tap the other person in.
That's
so for 12 months, we didn't sleep pretty much at the same time in the same bed because we were on different shifts. He would tap me in, or he would come back in, put Jax back into bed, crawl into bed, and within an hour, guaranteed, he'd start crying again, and Kerry would be like, I'm done, okay, I'm up. So get dressed. And that could happen anywhere as early as 11 p.m. if it's been one of those nights.
Oh, wow.
Or, you know,
so there's really nothing of the evening. Like, I mean, 11 p.m. is like, yeah.
No, we would get him to bed. He might sleep an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours max before the first wave had hit.
Wow. So you would also have to go to bed at 8 with him, basically, if you want to have the chance of any getting.
Yeah, a big chunk of it I ended up giving Corey to our other daughter, so that she would then take care of Corey and get her to sleep, and she'd often sleep with her in her bed. And then I would go to bed at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon just so I could get a decent chunk of sleep. That said, I don't sleep well when there's noise in the house. I don't sleep if any of my children are crying, which inevitably.
Yeah, obviously you have the mama ears, right? The mama bear ears. You pick up everything.
Even if my husband got up with my son, I'd be awake the entire time he was getting into the car, and I'd hear him drive away. It'd still take me a good 30, 40, maybe an hour to fall back to sleep once he left. I would hear him the second he walked back in the house, and then I'd be on hyper alert.
You had a lot of like mental chatter going on.
Yeah,
I suppose.
Always got mental chatter. And I've just discovered that I'm probably ADHD, so my mind goes a million miles an hour. So if I wake up, then
that fits with your whole betting on running 20 different horses at the same time.
Yes, we were discussing that. So I can't focus on things, and I try to do too many things at once. Anyway, so at the same time, often what would happen, particularly because my littlest was only 1, once Jax would go to sleep, she'd wake up. So if I wasn't one, it was the other. So I was going through periods of, I don't know how long. I'd be lucky if I got a couple of hours sleep in the night. And it was, if I got 6 hours sleep, it was never 6 hours in a row. It was all broken. And then the other thing that started to happen, so if I wasn't driving my son around, it was during the day I was taking care of the 2 kids while hubby worked. Thankfully for COVID, it meant that hubby could work from home because he had a normal day, and then an hour and 45 commute in one direction.
Oh my God, wow. Yeah, so that
12 hours of the day.
Okay, so that was, thank God lockdown happened.
And hard for him too. So it was, it meant that if he didn't crawl into bed just to get any sleep until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, he could roll out of bed at 7:25, log onto his computer and start work at 7:30 and then make his coffee. So we were living on coffee. Me, I don't drink coffee. I don't like coffee. I've never drunk coffee. But I discovered that if you drown it in chocolate, so it's mocha.
Then that's true, yes.
I could cope with it. So you can imagine I've come out
So
of
you
a
had a lot of
pregnancy.
sugar in you and a lot of caffeine,
Oh,
and you
oh
somehow
my
got
God.
through it.
I, yeah, my poor adrenal system was beyond shot.
Yeah, I
I
mean, it's
put
not a
on,
helpful diet now that you know you most likely are ADHD.
yeah, no, that's exactly right. But, it was survival.
Yeah, yeah,
The
absolutely.
level of
You're
survival we went to was ridiculous. So 12 months of not sleeping. We did 100,000 kilometers going nowhere that year.
oh my
We
God.
were constantly waiting for the next pediatrician, and then I
Next
pushed the point.
idea, right? Like the next medical
Someone,
idea, solution,
someone help
whatever.
me. Yep.
Mm.
There were times where, because the other thing too, he would bang his head on everything. The second he wake up, we knew we had, literally 60 seconds to get him into the car before it
He
ramped up
starts.
massively.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd get him out of the cot because he's like 3, 4 now, so big stocky little boy. And he would run to the front door, bang his head on the side of the front door. So you had to be quick.
Poor
And I had a
lad.
go bag,
Yeah.
so I'd have to grab the go bag, which had water in it and snacks in it for both of us. And then I'd open the door and he'd get to the car before me. He'd be banging his head on the side of the car. This kid had bruises on his forehead almost constantly. He would bite into his arms. He had bruises and bite marks on his arms. His fingers all calloused because he would chew on them. He would bang his head forward and backwards and
Yeah.
back, trying to deal with the pain. In the meantime, this is going on for so long, sitting in the front seat, most of the time you go numb. It's like, okay, buddy, you just get into this.
Yeah,
Is what
you
we're going
sort
to
of
do.
really
Get in the car and off we go.
dissociate, right? Like you're just
You
this
do. Because
functioning
otherwise you spend the
body.
whole time. Otherwise, your heart breaks every time. You just spend the whole time crying. And any time we went and visited my mum, and they would do some shifts for us during the night, mum would end up at the hospital going, "I can't cope. He's clearly in pain. We need to do something." I'm like, "Yeah, we've been doing this for 6, 8, 10, 12 months now."
What did
Just
that
trying to
do
get
to you as a person, like to you as Rage?
um in the worst of it, like when we really got towards the end and it was a groundhog day, so our relationship massively suffered, and it was strong going into that, but we suffered because we were now islands.
Mm-hmm.
We were both so far in survival mode, and what happens when you're in survival mode is you stop thinking about or having any awareness of the other person. You stop doing the little things like touching them on the shoulder or giving them a hug and saying, "Hey, how are you going?"
Yeah. Like a
It's
little,
just,
like
"Hey."
like those stolen moments, like the little embraces or kisses on the cheek, and like,
It all stops. It just stops. But it's not because any of us wanted it to stop. It's just because we're in survival and thinking, right, you're operating on what's the next thing I absolutely have to do. Okay, that child needs a butt change. And it'd be like, "Hey, babe, can you do this thing? Can you do that thing?" So we're both sort of acting as team members, but we're not connecting. We weren't
yeah,
connecting. And
you just have your chore list, and
yeah, and I'd have my days where I'd be laying in bed going, he's in zombie mode. And I'd be like, "He's not connecting, he's not." And then we had a conversation. He's like, "Well, you're not connecting either." I'm like, "Oh, you're right. I'm so sorry." So we had to have these conversations periodically through that time because the groundhog day of our existence was, I mean, our mental health was really through the floor. We were just such in a dark place. And there were definitely times where both of us thought about taking ourselves out. And towards the end, I nearly took my son in the car. We were driving again. We're at my mum's place. And I thought I could just drive into the water and drown us both and save the rest of my family. That's all I wanted to do, was save the rest of my family. Because we didn't know how long it was going to keep going. And it was killing us.
there was like, from a medical perspective, there was no outlook, like nothing to.
Oh, we'd seen a neurologist because I
Yeah.
pushed for it, because we couldn't tell if it was a pain in his head or a pain in his tummy. Like I was grasping at
Yeah.
anything, like anybody help me work it out. And because we decided to move from New South Wales to Queensland, in that process, we had to move and get new pediatricians and everything up in
So
Queensland.
you start the entire circus again.
Yeah, but I knew in that process, because when I finally got the referral for the neurologist, at that point we knew we were moving to Queensland, and it takes 3-4 months to get into,
Wow.
sometimes longer to get into specialists. So I booked
Wow.
it for Queensland, thinking we'd be up there in January, and we're staying at mum's at Christmas. We moved out of our house just before Christmas, moved to mum's place, with the intention of only being there for about 3 or 4 weeks. Well, it took a lot longer to find a place. and it was causing a lot of stress. But then they got a real feel for what our life had been like for nearly 12 months at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, we were in and out of hospital. We ended up getting him into hospital because every time we'd go to hospital, by the time they'd see him, he'd be out of the pain episode. It'd be done. So they're like, oh, he's not in crisis mode. It's not appendicitis. We don't need to do anything right now. Just wait until you see your pediatrician. So nobody would do anything. And then we did get him into hospital because I pushed to get him to x-ray his tummy because he had some impaction when he was younger, and we were able to deal with that. So I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe anything.
Well, I mean, you generally do like an MRI or a CT scan if you.
Yeah, they do an X-ray. Yep.
If there's not, if there's like, just do it. I mean, fuck's sake, like maybe there's something showing up if it's your last straw.
So I pushed for the X-ray, and the X-ray came back showing there was pretty significant impaction, which meant there were a lot of poop all the way through him. Yeah. Even though his poop was
that's causing pain too.
Yeah, but his poop was like cake batter, so that didn't make sense to me. But I'm like, okay, whatever, just let's do something. So we got into the hospital, and I mean, there's a whole other level of trauma there. Everything we do with him is traumatic because he fights. He doesn't understand. They had to put a tube down his nose, a gastric tube. Yeah. And they tried to come at him with the mask. Well, I was holding him down. We had 5 nurses plus me trying to hold him down. This is a 3-year-old. Because he doesn't like things on the face. His adrenaline.
Yeah, has no idea what's going on. And
no, he fought it. He doesn't like things on his face, and everybody's trying to hold this mask on his face, and then trying to put needles in his hands to put the cannula in, take the blood, but also then a gastric tube. I was able to stay in the room for probably the first 35 minutes, and then I couldn't cope anymore because I'm like, we've got to stop. But the problem was because they'd had the mask on him, they couldn't use another form of sedation to get the stuff into him, which was going to help his tummy. So they had to keep going. So in the end, they sent me away.
But then at the end, I always feel like it's also better, like, if you're not there, right? Because he's not associating then you with that pain.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I remember I only had one stint so far with our kid at the hospital. And I remember, like, the first time I went there, that kind of wanted to, like, half send us back. And I was like, well... Then they're like, well, you're just like coming, like, I'm like, he's not, like, there's no way I can hold him. He's very strong. There's no way I can hold him and give him the medicine. And he was like 2. He has no idea why he should take this nasty stuff. So I cannot do that both unless I use an excessive amount of physical force that I'm not willing to do because I don't want him to associate me with that pain. So I rather come here and have some random pediatrician nurse do it and me comforting him again to kind of have this intact than me doing it myself.
Yeah, and there's 2 ways to think about that. For me, it's also with Jax, having someone who's familiar that's there with him so it doesn't feel as bad, as hard as it was. And then they sent me out of the room and I had to sit outside and I could hear him screaming and screaming and screaming and fighting so hard. And at the end of it, when they finally got it in, I said, there's no way that gastric tube's staying in. I'm telling you now, you can bandage his hands, he will find a way, he'll pull it out. And he did. But they got the first lot in, and then after that, we were both traumatized massively. We went back to his room. I literally crawled into the bed next to him and I just stayed there until he went to sleep. I wrapped him up in his favourite blanket and I cried and I cried and I cried. I'm like, I will never put you through that again. So in my head, I'm like, well, we need to get more of that stuff in him because he needed to have it once a day.
You knew the path ahead.
So I'm like, we're not doing it that way. We are not doing it that way. And then I realised, the mask, that's the wrong way to go about it. So I suggested that they give him something else, some other sedative that doesn't require a mask, and then we go that way. And I say, we just put the gastric tube in, we put the stuff in, and we get it out, and then that's the end of it. So I came to the doctor the next morning and said, right, here's what I'm proposing, here's what I think will work. And they thanked me because they're like, we had no idea how we were going to do this because we're worried about him. Anyway, we
How did
spent
it
three
make
and a
you
half months.
feel? Like, I mean, I know from myself, I had to do a lot of medical advocacy for myself because I wasn't believed. I wasn't like,
Yeah,
oh, whatever. Um,
yeah.
so how did that make you feel to have, I mean, to be to full on advocate for your son who is in no position to express himself? How did you cope with that?
Um, I'm getting used to it. I mean, this is 5 years on, and even when we're getting his diagnosis, I had to go, right, this is what he's struggling with, this is what we're noticing.
Mm,
Getting, like here in Australia, we have NDIS, which is the National Disability Scheme.
yeah,
So to get funding for his OT, for his speech, for the things that he needs to make his life a bit easier, to help him to develop skills
yeah.
and stuff that I don't know how to teach him. It's a big fight. Like you really got to go to bat and you've got to push the point. And I find that the hardest, one of the things that we have to do to get the funding,
The
because we
pushing.
have to go through, yeah, because we've got to go through, and we've got to basically in the report, and we've got to do a first-hand account. Like I wrote a 12-page first-hand account of what it's like living with Jax and the things that he struggles with and what it looks like on a day-to-day level. And you kind of got to paint the worst picture, because in order to get the level of funding, you'll never get the level of funding you really need,
Mm,
but you've got to paint the worst picture as if it's more often than not. Now, going into Hell Year, I managed to paint a pretty good picture because we got funding at least for that year, because I'd hurt my back. I
mm,
couldn't lift him, and he would go into massive flops and stuff. So I just kept injuring myself.
yeah.
So I managed to get decent funding for support that year, and thank God. Like I really think God was looking out for us, because we did have someone that would come each day and help for the most part. Because otherwise, I would have ended up in hospital with the
Mm,
amount of burnout. But in those reports, you've got to focus on the worst part of it. And every report you get from the OT, from the speech, from that, they always talk about, how far behind his peers he is, how much he struggles, and you see it in black and white. And it's like, oh, I
mm-hmm.
hate someone who's a mindset coach, and we we feel the stuff, but we focus on the positive and the possibilities and whatnot. And then in these
Yeah.
processes, we have
It's
to
the
focus
exact,
on the worst
yeah.
parts of it.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
you
so
keep on rereading
emotionally,
it in black and white, and it's
yeah.
just,
And then every meeting you've got to talk about it. And while this is it's so bad,
yeah.
it's this, and it is. But I don't want to focus on it. And it
Yeah, it's
really, I
not going to
struggle.
help you in your day-to-day life by just
No,
focusing on what he can't do, right? It's,
yeah. So, hell yeah. So that was hard enough. And
mm.
that was only three-quarters of the picture.
Yeah, I mean, you still had your business with the US, you had your other children, I
Well,
mean,
I
your
wasn't
own
doing anything.
health.
Yeah, my business I basically stepped away from the business. I just couldn't. I had no capacity. I
Mm,
literally had no capacity. My days were spent taking care of the two littles, getting through the day, driving my son around when he
mm.
when he went into another pain
How were
episode.
your your older children coping?
Hard, because we'd put a lot of the load, particularly with Corey, on Tyler, our daughter.
Mhm.
Our eldest was not living there at the time.
Okay.
She'd already moved out and was, living her own life in Canberra. So it was
Mm.
really just us and our teenager, who was, 15 at the
Yeah.
time. But yeah, as that kind of kicked in, our little girl Corey started to have these massive rages, like epic meltdowns. Um, she's my fourth child. I can deal with tantrums. Tantrums
You
I've
got
got,
them.
babe.
You
No
got them.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tantrums here, okay? And then you add
Yeah.
an autistic meltdown
Oh.
on top of that,
Mhm.
which means she gets to a point where she can't stand you talking. Don't touch her. Don't look at her.
Yeah, it's
Just
complete sensory
don't.
overload.
Sensory overload.
Yeah.
And then from there, it would turn into a rage. Like she
Oh
would
goodness.
spend
Yeah.
anywhere from 20 minutes to 45 minutes screaming,
Mhm.
crying. And
Oh.
and she would hurt herself. So she'd bang her head on stuff. She'd
Oh.
smack her own face. She'd
Mm.
try to get underneath stuff. But if you tried to touch her or do anything to help her,
Yeah.
she would go at me. So I've got
Yeah. So
scars
there's
from
no way you kind of like got her out of her of that rod to kind of like refocus
No,
her attention. Yeah.
she wouldn't accept any of the things that she would normally see as comfort. So she wouldn't accept her
Mhm.
bottle. She wouldn't accept her blanket. She would just, um, So she would try to gouge my eyes out. She'd try to rip my earrings out. She'd try to bite me. She'd try to scratch me. Like she really went, it's like trying to put a feral cat into a bath and it's
Mm.
facing you. So I'd had to try and, yeah, protect myself. I've got scars from a lot of her scratches. And then I'd have to kind of just sit near her because she would escalate if I got too close. She would escalate if I tried to go away.
Mm-hmm.
And escalate meant that she would hurt herself more. And if I touched her, well, she'd go at me. She would bite her own arms. She would,
Mm.
and she was just so angry and so upset, and she had absolutely no control. And I could
Yeah,
see
over
that
these big emotions.
huge emotions, like
Mm.
intense emotions, she could not control.
Mm.
And she would go from
How old
0
was
to
she at the
100.
time? Like two-ish or one, two-ish? Yeah.
So this was happening at the same time as Hell You.
Yeah.
But going no sleep.
Lovely.
And if I wasn't in the car with Jax driving him around, which we were for 80% of the 24-hour day, I would be sitting with my littlest one, trying to keep her safe. And then once she would calm down enough, then I could pick her up, but it'd still be another half hour, 45 minutes before she was ready to get up off me and get back to life. Or she
Okay.
would fall asleep because she was so emotionally drained.
Yeah.
I would
I
often
mean, at
cry.
some point the body will give out, right? Like that's yeah.
Yeah. And I would often cry once she settled down and she was in my arms. And it'd be like, oh my God, that was so hard. You know, it just
Yeah. And I
feel
suppose your mommy
shattered and
heart
bruised.
that needs the hug and the comfort.
Oh, massively. Because what do you do with the feeling of being battered and bruised and abused by someone you love, but you can't get angry at them. I was never angry, but I
Mm.
would just cry because I'm like, I feel battered
Yeah.
and bruised, and it's not fair,
Yeah.
and I feel for my child who's just cannot control it. So just
Yeah.
all the emotions, and having to process that, and she would go into those 2 to 4 times a day.
Yeah. Oh
So if I
wow.
wasn't soothing her and helping her to get
Yeah.
to another side of a rage, I was driving my son around, and that was my life. That was it.
Mm.
I had nothing else. Self
And
care.
you kept your sanity.
I barely kept my sanity. I mean, I really struggled mentally. It was to the point where I was numb for a big chunk of the day. It was just, what do I need? What do I absolutely need to do?
The
Okay,
really
now
numbing as
I can't put it
like
off.
for
Yeah, I can't put it off
survival.
anymore. Child needs feeding. Feed child, change child. Child needs, okay, now we're in a meltdown. Okay, get them through the meltdown. No, Jax needs a drive. Okay, take Jax for a drive. Oh, we've got a therapy appointment. Okay, take one child to the therapy appointment. Okay, come back. Okay, now we've got a rage. Okay, and literally
Mhm.
24/7. So it was hard. It stretched me like
Mhm.
the deepest depths of survival. So on top of that, my body was struggling. I had depletion after I had Corey, which meant
Mhm.
my vitamin mineral levels were all really low, just purely from the pregnancy, let alone the
Mhm.
load of the sleep depression and stress post child. So it
Yeah, I
got
mean,
so
you were
bad.
still in like, I mean, you were still in postpartum recovery. Like 2 years is nothing if you in
Yeah, so
postpartum
you don't
recovery.
think of that. You think postpartum's only the first 1 to 3 months, but it's not.
No, it's not.
So no, it's not. And
No,
with the
it's
load,
actually not. No, I my midwife.
no,
She was splendid. She was brilliant. She told me it's like biologically, it's 2 years after you've given birth
yeah,
until your body like is kind of like the hormone levels and everything has kind of like went back to
right,
normal, whatever that is. I mean, and for some cases like myself it never really did. um
yep,
and then it's up to 12 to 18 months when you stop breastfeeding
mm,
that all your like ligaments and stuff will kind of like stiffen back into their
back to
original
normal.
like yeah. So I
Yep,
mean, I nursed for
yep.
2 years, so I'm
I
still in
couldn't.
that postpartum. I'm still in that postpartum if you like
Yep.
go from
Wow.
12 to 18 months because he's 3 now, right? Like it's crazy. It's not 3 weeks after delivery. No.
No, it's a lot longer, and if you've got massive stress and sleep deprivation going on, that it's even longer. So
Yeah.
I ended up, I had to go to, I went to an integrative doctor who does a mixture of medical as well as naturopathy.
Yeah.
And they did all my blood tests, and because I was struggling, like, you know how sometimes you're so tired and the word just doesn't come. The
Oh,
word
yeah,
just
yeah.
doesn't. Okay, so once you get past that, full sentences disappear.
Oh, I've never
When
made
you
it to
get
that
past that,
stage, luckily, but
oh, well, it goes further. So once sentences start to disappear, if you go further, everything disappears. You don't even think the words in order to say them. Then the next
it's just a
stage,
blank. It's just
it's
a
just blank.
black, deep, dark black hole.
I would stand in the kitchen, they'd be talking to me, and I'd be like, it's like the ability to speak just disappears. Then after that, you stop being able to understand what the other people are saying.
Oh,
It's like the brain just starts to shut
yeah.
down. So
Yeah, I mean, it just focuses on the most
yeah,
necessary
that's
needed
right.
tasks, and
It's
understanding that gibberish doesn't is not included.
no, right. In that moment, the body is starting to shut down unnecessary things because it's trying to keep going. I
It's
was
trying to
still
keep you
upright.
safe most of the time,
I
right? Like
was
the
still,
body will always try to
yep.
keep you safe.
I was still walking around trying to do the things for the kids. And these are the things that we would notice that my body would do as we really got way, I mean, I was already well beyond exhaustion. I don't even know what the word is for that, but it's just way beyond. So, and I was also having dissociative episodes. That's the technical term. For when you're driving along and you see yourself drive into a tree, drive off a bridge, drive into oncoming traffic,
Yeah.
no desire to do it, but my brain would give me these beautiful scenarios, and I started to get really scared that my hand one day would participate in it.
Yeah.
And off we go. And I'm like, this is starting to get quite scary. So that's when I'm
Yes.
like, okay, clearly I need some help here. So I went to the doctor and they, did all the blood tests and like, wow, your estrogen's way too high, your thyroid's struggling, you're really low on all of these minerals, and like
Probably iron is like iron anyway, and like
massive, there's a huge amount of physical stress. Living on coffee, which I never drank before and I still don't drink now when I don't need to. All of that, postpartum.
exactly.
So
Then when you know your body is depleted and you should take great care of your body and kind of refill all your body storage, and like you were like,
yeah, so my body was like, we were beyond the bottom of the barrel. Like my body was just, I mean, poor thing. I was doing the best that it could. So they were literally loading me up with stupid amounts of supplements, and it helped me to get off the edge.
Yeah, to kind of like reach baseline again. Not doing well, but baseline.
Oh, we were well below doing well. But at least I was off the edge and I didn't have as many episodes where my brain would completely shut down. Like at that point, I would be standing in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face. They're talking to me and I'm like, I've got no words coming out. I've got no idea what they're telling me. My husband was like, okay, off to bed for you. And they'd put me into bed and I'd be asleep in 2 seconds, which is not like me. Clearly, just so
there was too much going on for your body.
Way too much. I mean, even now I have problems when it's too much. So, that was going on at the same time. And so my husband was also doing his best to take the slack when I was literally out of action. And he did really well, but,
he also kept his job, right? Like, I suppose, like he
and then
worked full time.
So in the middle of that, he had, so he works for a company where he does the admin, and it's project based. So when the project gets to a delivery time, everybody's like working
super
all
busy and
crazy
crazy
hours to try and get it out on time. So there were a couple of weeks there within that where he did an 80-hour week, where he would get home from driving our son around and the coffee was still in effect. He put our son on the couch and then he would do the work for an hour or two because he was wired with coffee. And then if our son woke up, he would take him for another drive. And then he would come back, and then he'd have some sleep, and then I would get up and take over, and then I'd come home, and then he'd be up and he'd be working. But the problem was it put extra load on me because it meant he was less in the mix to help me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so you had to take his slack. Yeah.
It was just like, and we did have help. My aunt came to stay, was only supposed to be for a couple of weeks, I think by the May, June. So we'd been doing this for about 4 or 5 months already. And because she came from Victoria and Victoria went into massive lockdown, she stayed until Christmas.
She couldn't go back. Okay. Yeah.
She couldn't do the physical runs at night time, but she did things like she did the washing for us and she took off some of the load during the day.
Yeah, which is like a massive help, right? Like just having mental load off your back,
He
like
would
dishes,
he would
laundry.
cook. I know. So we had someone who would help me with the kids during the day because I couldn't take the two of them to their therapy appointments. I always needed to leave one at
Mm,
home, and then my aunt would help with some basic stuff in the house, and um, so
yeah.
we had that support for that year. But even that, we were. I mean, if we didn't have that, like I said, we would have ended up in hospital. One of us would have ended up not here. I just
Yeah.
don't. We were supported through that time, but it was still extremely difficult.
So
But the
what do you
entire
think got you
time,
through that hardship?
I mean, just the two of us being together, we had such a strong relationship going into that we would still have our moments where we'd fall in each other's arms and go, "This is fucking hard." Like, are
Mm,
you doing all right? I'm doing all right. No, knowing full well neither one of us is really doing okay.
mm-hmm.
Um, I had my friends. There were certain people in my life that I could just. They often checked in on me because I was so much in survival mode that I wasn't even reaching out. I wasn't even on social
Mm-hmm.
media. I was literally just surviving day to day. I did have a couple of people that I was doing some sessions with that would just help me to just defrag a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I utilized some of the counseling, but counseling's never really done much for me. It's like, yeah, we can talk about it, but really the only thing that's going to change, like things are not going to get better until I work out how to get him to sleep, like how to deal with, like once we get rid
Mm-hmm.
of his pain, he'll sleep. And one of the pediatricians we saw goes, oh, I think it's behavioral. I think it's just part of his autism. I'm like, what? No, I'm telling you, this kid is in pain. So,
But
don't
how
quote
did
the
you get
Bible.
out of Hellier? Like, did you get like the medical diagnosis then at the end, or like?
So how we got out of hell, yeah, like I was saying, we moved to Queensland, which meant I had
Mm-hmm.
to do. So we saw a neurologist up here first, but we had to drive from my mum's, she was 5.5 hours from Brisbane. So it was a 5.5 hour drive to come up and see the neurologist because we hadn't quite moved up here yet.
Mm.
Um, and he said, look, there's nothing in his tests that show that it's his brain because he had
Mm-hmm.
one of those
Yeah, yeah,
ECGs.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's what they're called. I think yeah.
Yeah, which, it's
Mm.
never fun getting him to
Yeah,
do
the
that.
brainwave thingies. Mm.
Yeah, so they were checking for epilepsy and because he's had
Yeah,
absent seizures before.
yeah.
So yes, there was some changes from the last one he did, but not enough to suggest that there was actually epilepsy going on or that the
Mm-hmm.
seizures might be causing headaches, which is what I wanted to know. I'm like, can
Yeah,
we
exactly.
rule
I
that
mean,
out at
you need
least?
a cause for the pain. Like, I mean, you see
Yeah,
seizures. Seizures are
anything.
visible. I mean,
He's
but
in pain, people. He's
it's
in
an
pain.
invisible
Work out
pain.
pain.
So it's not a
And he
seizure
can't
per
tell me.
se, but yeah.
He acts the same way no matter where the pain is. Um, so the neurologist was the first one to say, look, if things get really bad, go to Queensland Children's Hospital, get in there, and then they'll get a team of people onto him. So
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, well, we're just wait until we see. And he said, I think you should see a developmental pediatrician because we were seeing one that was very focused on gut health, and we were trying our best to do the gut health thing. But
Of course, which was the first like
okay, all
sort
right,
of
well, I'm
hook
open
to
to this
like
being a
open something.
behavioural thing, but I really don't think this is behavioural. Anyway, so we managed to get in on a cancellation. So just as we came out of hospital for the impaction, we literally
Mm,
drove the next day back up to Queensland, which was 6 hours because she was up on the Sunshine Coast,
mm,
to see this paediatrician looking for answers. So we didn't really get any answers out of that session. She said there were a couple of things she wanted to look at. And things she suggested we try, and I'm like, okay. So we drove all the way back down to my mum's, and it was only a couple of days later when we were just having another really bad day, and I'm at my wit's end because we'd finally gotten a place, but it was still going to be another 4 weeks before we moved. So
mm-hmm.
weren't worried about the stress of having a place that was done, but we had this time, and I'm like, I do not want to start in my new place with the same Groundhog Day that we have not been able to
Yeah,
escape.
it
Like,
needs to
no,
be like not just a
no.
change of scenery, but like a change.
Yes, I'm like, no,
Mm.
not happening, not happening. So, and it was like an afternoon, like a Monday afternoon or something, and I was almost on my knees with God. Like, what can we do? And then I remembered that
Were
the
you a
neurologist,
religious person before Hellier?
no, spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
It's only been more recently that I've decided to open up to a relationship with God, and I'm still exploring that. But
Mm-hmm.
when I would pray, it'd be like, God, universe, source, creator, whatever
Whatever.
you're called.
Whoever the fuck is
I need
listening.
help. I mean, I've been screaming for help the entire time, but I'm like, what do we do?
Mm-hmm.
So I just remembered that the neurologist has said, go to Queensland Children's if it gets really bad. I'm like, it's bad. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
I
been
mean,
bad the whole way
how
along,
bad?
but
yeah, how bad there should it get? Yeah, like no, yeah, go.
My mother was freaking out and going, she was struggling because now she's had, nearly 2 months of dealing with this.
Mm,
Um, and she's not coping. So I'm like, okay, nobody here's coping. Everybody's not coping with our life. And we've done it for 12 months and we're not coping with our life. So, okay, we've got to do that. So I rang the pediatrician to see if she could get us referred into Queensland Children's, but because we're in New South Wales and it's a different state, they couldn't do the referral. She said, but turn up to emergency. Now, we'd done emergency a number of times and we'd been turned away. So it was a gamble to drive 5.5
hours to be admitted or just be like, nah, go back.
Or sent home.
Yeah.
So, but something in me said, I've got to try something, because the other regional hospitals near Mum's kept saying, well, wait till you see your pediatrician, wait till. So Mum said she'd come with me. Hubby'd already taken too much time off doing the other appointments. So I left him and everybody else there, and Mum and I drove up. And by the time we got up to the hospital at 7:30 p.m, we got into emergency. And right on cue, Jax went into a meltdown. And they
before you always kind of like, you were always kind of late. You've always missed a lot of time. You've missed the episode, as I understood. Right?
He would be in pain and screaming when we got to the other hospitals, but it never got us through. The doctors never saw him at that time. Okay. So I got to Queensland.
So anyway, you got to Queensland Children's Hospital, and he right on cue, he had a meltdown.
Took us right out the back real fast and got us into a room where we could just sit him on the ground with his blanket and just let him settle down. Triage nurse came in and we started to tell our story. She goes, okay, hold on. Went and got the doctor and said, okay, start again. And as I started to go into that, doctor says, right, stop. Go right back to the very beginning. Tell me about his medical history from the time he was born. She said, I want to know it all. And in that process, she goes, look, we're going to admit him. You guys cannot live like this while he's not in an acute situation like appendicitis. There is clearly something wrong, and you have dealt with this for 12 months. Mum and I burst into tears. It was the first time we'd felt
I would just say, how did that make you feel? Like, I got shivers. I got shivers now.
Relieved. For the first time, someone was listening. Someone was willing to listen to us and to try and help us. So, in the process, we got admitted. And hubby drove up the next day, and we got an email from the pediatrician that we had mentioned or tried to get to refer us in. And she'd been thinking about us since we were there. She's like, something's not right. She had mentioned when we were in there, she's like, have you looked at FODMAP foods? So FODMAPs. FODMAP foods. Okay.
Yeah.
And I said, well,
I have IBS, endo, and celiac disease, so I'm good with FODMAPs. But if you whoever is listening, if you're not, Google FODMAPs. It can really help you if you have gut issues. That's all I say.
So in the appointment, not knowing a lot about, I knew a little bit, but I didn't know a lot. I had a friend who couldn't have FODMAP foods, which just meant in my mind, garlic and onions. So I'm like, no, I don't give him garlic and onions. I took those out. She goes, oh, okay. But, she told me to tell her what his diet had. So she emailed us after we'd already been admitted to the hospital, and she said, look, I really think FODMAP foods might be a problem. So, try and take them out and let's see what happens. I'm like,
dietary changes are the easiest changes if you want.
So almond meal, like his muffins were made out of almond meal. His meatballs had the cauliflower, asparagus, and a few other things in it that, were high FODMAP. So we got rid of his muffins, and I had a friend who lived up here, and I just messaged him and said, look, if I give you the money, can you make a new batch of meatballs for me for Jackson? And we went and found some spelt sourdough bread, which apparently is okay on FODMAP. He'd been gluten-free, dairy-free, sugar-free, low carb, fruit-free, everything free, this poor kid. I just had him on these meatballs with veggies, and I had these muffins that were low, I was doing all the things. So he made the meatballs, and this was on day 2. So they had seen him and what happened at night time for that first 2 nights. And they're like, okay, so then they organised gastroenterology, MRI, and all these other things to be done that week. And they were giving him pain meds to try and help him as well. He had a cannula and all of that. So we changed the meatball recipe. We got rid of all the FODMAP foods. And within about 24 hours, he slept. We thought, okay, he's done one night. Here and there, we've had a singular night. And we
Yeah,
think
that's like, let's hold our horses. But
so 2 nights he slept. I'm like, okay. It's
okay,
looking
we take
good.
it. We take
But I'm
it.
not celebrating yet.
Yeah, yeah. But I take it. But yeah.
We got
The
to the
champagne is
third
still
night.
cold.
Third night, I'm like, maybe we have sorted this. So we weren't in hospital for another probably 2 days after that. They still did the MRI. They still did all the other checks.
Yeah, I mean, now that you're there, make sure there's nothing else.
Yeah, so we didn't end up seeing the gastroenterologist because it seemed to resolve once we changed the food. So there was no emergency need to see the gastroenterologist. But then the doctors basically said, okay, well, now you're going to head back to where you were before, where he was screaming and doing all that sort of stuff. So now the next test is to cancel out behavioural, to go back to that environment. And if it starts up again, then it might be, a bit of a behavioural thing,
Component.
not necessarily. Yeah. But I always knew. I knew you solve the pain, you solve the problem. So we got back to Mum's, and not once did he try to go to the car.
Wow.
He slept all night.
Wow.
He fell asleep easily. And that's how it stayed. And it was only like a week later that we moved into our place here in March last year.
Wow.
So what had happened was when we gave him the antibiotics, because his gut was already sensitive, it made it extra sensitive. So then FODMAP foods became a problem that kept the problem going. The food was literally fermenting in his stomach, in his digestive system. When they did a gut biome test, like they got his poop, it showed that there was blood in there, which means there was significant inflammation all the way through his intestines. Yes. He had cake batter poo, which means there was mucus being created because his body was trying to protect itself. I mean, this kid was in excruciating pain.
Yeah.
He has
what his body did to survive is insane, right? Like, yeah.
It was heartbreaking. And then thankfully, once we got set up here, I found a new dietitian, and it was the dietitian that suggested that for Corey, amines and salicylates may be a problem. So salicylates generally in kids like her trigger them to be hyperactive and impulse control issues, and the amines trigger the rages and the ODD. So we took those. The dietitian's like, just, wean her off those. I'm like, hell no, out, all of them. So I took them all out. Within a week, we noticed a significant reduction in the amount of meltdowns and the severity of them. Within a month, no more rages.
Wow.
And the meltdown count, now we're down to a typical tantrum. But because we can't keep her on that limited diet, and she would and both of them, they self-limit on top of their diet limitations. So they can't stay on these super restrictive diets without having a fallout. Both of them are iron deficient. We've got her on a supplement now, but she's going to kindy, and they're getting, they've got the fruit platters, and she wants to join in. She so desperately wants to join in. Really wants to have the fruit. But the only safe fruit for her is a peeled pear, not just a pear, a peeled pear.
Yeah, a peeled pear.
And she doesn't want to eat a peeled pear. She wants to eat the apple, and she wants to eat the orange, and
the pineapple, and the plums, and the strawberries. Yeah.
And strawberries and raspberries are bad. Anyway, she wants to.
I feel this. Like, I so feel this. I mean, I got diagnosed with celiac in 2019, and like, even to this day, although I'm a fucking grown adult, I'm like, fuck, I want to eat that regular birthday cake.
I hear you. I walk past Baker's Delight, which is one of the awesome bakery here, and I can't have any of it. So
I don't even know how it is for children, right? Like, you want them to be safe because they can't have foods, but at the same time, I
want to encourage her to try new things because she self-limits, but
not have her life just be around food. It's just not.
Well, I can tell when she's had food that she shouldn't have, because then we get the oversensitivity. Then without even asking her any questions, she'll just start saying no. I'm like, oh. Then it doesn't matter what you try to give her or offer her. It's like a no, like the real ODD kind of kicks in.
Yeah.
Like nothing, you're not doing anything you even suggest. Not even reverse psychology is going to work at that point. And then we go into full-blown meltdowns because I might have said, oh, let's do this instead. And it's like, no, like, and then we have had rages. But I know that it's just her body letting us know that it's hit a tolerance level and I need to go back to basics for a bit.
Right. Like, I mean, it helps. You have a way of like, okay, judging, categorizing this and like, oh, okay, I can deal with this because I know now what it is, right?
I know what it is, yeah. And it's not easy. I mean, as she gets older, and she's also got speech apraxia, so she can't communicate very well. She understands a lot, but she can't get her mouth to do the things
she wants the mouth to do.
So she gets really frustrated when we really don't understand. And I'm like, she says the word apple for 1,000 things. I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What do you need, my baby? I will give you anything you need if you can tell me or show me what it is that you need. But the second she realizes she's not getting it, even though you just don't understand what she's asking for, she has a massive meltdown because now, I'm like, oh, baby, I don't know how to help you. But, you know, out of all of that, so Hell Yeah was ridiculously, extremely, and hard doesn't even cover it. Like, it was the hardest, stressful, emotional, like everything, like my everything now compares to Hell Yeah, and it doesn't even compare. But all the way through it, as hard as it was, I always knew there was a reason for it. I didn't know what it was at the time. I'm like, somewhere along the line, I'm going to know why we've experienced the hell that we have. And here we are.
Do you know now?
Yeah, I think so. We're over 18 months. What is it? March last year was when we got resolution and started to recover. So what is that? A year? March, April, May,
year and a half.
September. Yeah, so 18 months. Yeah, 18 months. So starting to feel like I've got space for business. And initially I'm like, okay, well, all right, universe, God, what am I doing? And what came through was relationships, which I'd done years and years ago. And I thought, well, that makes sense because Kerry and I, even though, you know, Hell Yeah really rocked us.
You're still together, right? I mean, that's a massive fucking achievement. Like,
well, it is, but I didn't know that at the time that, you know, couples who have special needs, high needs, neurodiverse children have a really high divorce breakup rate, like ridiculously high. Like there's some statistics say 80%, some say 90, some say 50.
Yeah, it doesn't matter, but it's ridiculously high.
Doesn't matter. It's higher than the average.
Yeah.
And understandably so, because if you've got any gaps or cracks in your relationship, when you add children, that puts stress on and makes it more visible. Yeah. But you add the kind of
what do you think of the whole thing, like having kids to save your marriage?
Oh, God. Honey, that will break it. In more often than not, it's not going to save it. It's actually going to highlight more of the issues so you can see them.
Exactly, right? It's like you're using a fucking magnifier to everything that was sort of bugging you, but not enough to mention it. And suddenly it gets like highlighted. Like these really bad mirrors at the hotel rooms where you see every pore.
Everything.
So bad.
Yep. And when you're under stress and pressure and the kind of extreme pressures that, you know, us as, you know, special needs parents, having that later.
I don't know what about you, but I can get nasty if I'm really under pressure.
Yeah, but we're not our best person.
No.
We don't have the same capacity for patience, for understanding, for not getting triggered in our stuff. And we act out from that stuff when we're at capacity, as our children do when they don't have capacity. They go into meltdown. I'm like, okay,
we're so much more understanding with our children than with our own capacity.
I know. Tell me about it. It's something we work on. But we use the term capacity even in our relationship now that we've learned it through having kids that are neurodiverse. So I can say no capacity. In fact, we've got a traffic light system that we can just say red, which means no capacity. Yeah. Need to get out of this mix now.
We sometimes do the spoon thing, you know, where you have like 5 spoons.
Yeah, so we don't do spoons, we do traffic lights.
Like that's also brilliant. I also like a traffic light.
We have 3 numbers for orange. So orange 1 just means, okay, we're just out of the green and we're heading in the wrong direction. Orange 2, we've agreed that once you get to orange 2, it means, okay, you need out of the mix or time out.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope to red.
Yeah, but it's not. But it's not now. And then Orange 3 is almost like a hey, red's around the corner.
Last
Sometimes we go from
reminder.
Orange 1 to red real quick. But
Mm.
yeah, once we hit red, so then we also have an extra one which is black. So you know those
So
days where you
yeah.
just feel so depressed and down and just withdrawn.
Mm.
We have those days sometimes still. So
Well, I
I
mean,
know on
that's
those days,
natural, right? That's life. So
yeah,
would you say kind of like Hellier has inspired like for you and your husband to communicate better or more often, more
yeah. Well,
sincerely?
we had to learn how to survive in our relationship on the littlest things because the
Mm,
big things weren't happening. We weren't getting quality time. We weren't having date nights. We weren't having
mm,
sex. I mean, none of that was present and is
mm,
still limited in our current existence. So we had to get really good at things like appreciation. Like,
mm,
honey, thank you so much for helping me out, or thank you,
mm.
you're just
Words of
amazing, you're my rock.
affection and mhm,
Appreciation goes a long way. So, yeah, I love you, but the appreciation actually has even
mhm,
more juice because it says, I
mm.
see you. I know
Yeah.
you're trying
I
hard.
see what you're
Right?
doing, and
Yeah,
although I see
a
what
little
you're
bit of
doing, and I
validation.
see the stage you're doing it in, right? Like it's
Yeah, exactly.
mm,
So the words of appreciation was such a big thing. Making a conscious effort to just go and give each other a hug and some physical
mhm,
touch, little things. And sometimes
mhm.
that was it. That's all there is. I can hear the mummy in the background here.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fine.
but we had
Like
to
you can let
use.
them in if you want. Like,
All right, give me a second.
yeah, yeah,
Sure.
no problem.
Hey, Baba.
Oh,
Okay.
hello.
Oh, we may not. That's
Oh,
okay.
hello, Sunshine. Oh, are you sleepyhead?
Yeah, it's 6:30 in the morning.
That's
So
fine.
yeah, so what I did was I took all of that and decided I'm going to work with couples who have special needs, neurodiverse children, and help them to
Mm,
build a relationship that is strong, that is resilient, that can
mm,
survive those hard times like we had to, but then learn
mm,
how to thrive beyond them. Because the other thing I learned was once the kids slept and once we organized, sorted out her rages, we
mm.
still had to rebuild our relationship because we'd gotten into a survival
Yeah,
pattern. And the
yeah.
survival pattern was I just do the next thing that I need to do, not
Yeah,
having
kids
awareness of
first,
the
you
other person.
second, partner
Yeah.
third, and like,
So
ugh.
we've had to reprogram ourselves to come back to each other, to more
Mm.
cuddles, more. We spent so long sleeping on separate sides of the bed that we stopped cuddling in the middle of the
Or
night.
like not sleeping like at the same
Yeah.
time, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah.
So you wouldn't cuddle the other person because you didn't want to wake them in case, because they'd only had a few hours sleep. So we stopped doing those things.
How
Um,
did that feel? Like, I mean, you were
hard.
together for such a long time, right? Like you had
Yeah.
these intense, lovable moments. Then you had baby, and then you had hell year, and now you're like,
It's
shit.
so
Now we're
hard.
like middle aged, and we have to find our way back to each other.
Yeah. And look, there's still some grief sometimes because it's like, well, we don't have the relationship we had in the beginning.
Hmm.
Even before we had the two littles, life was great with sex on a regular basis and, plenty of quality time to chat, time to just hang out,
Hmm.
go places.
Hmm.
When we decided to have our son, we didn't expect he was going to come in with special needs. This is not the life that we
No,
planned.
no one like plans that ahead. But like, I
No.
mean, mhm.
And then our unexpected little gift here. Um, I even considered not having her. I did because after all of everything that happened with Jax, there was also a question mark as to whether or not it was safe enough for me to have another one.
Hmm.
Um, so, but every time I thought about not having her, I cried. I'm like, oh, okay. I
So
have to
this
trust
is not,
that.
yeah, yeah.
We have to trust that, whatever comes our way, we can handle, not knowing that hell year
Mm,
was only a year or two down the track. But we
mm.
survived. And we didn't just survive
Where do
it.
you think that innate knowing that whatever comes your way, you can manage, you can handle, you can survive? Where do you think
I
that
mean,
innate
I,
knowing is coming from?
I think it's a mixture of things. I think having done a lot of personal development and a lot of that stuff is kind of a core belief within that.
Mm,
And even in plenty of religions, it's the same thing. So God never gives you more than you can handle, or So there's a
Mm,
lot of things that I think I've been programmed with at some point, but at the same time, I know I've also, some of the stuff I learned through growing up at, a Catholic home and a Catholic school. There's plenty of things that I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So, I'm not going to take that on. But there's something comforting about, and I have seen it. Now, there's
mhm,
plenty of times in my life where stuff has happened, and then down the track, I'm like, oh, now I understand why I went through that experience. So I've
mm.
always utilized my experience in some way. And
Yeah,
initially this year, I thought, oh, I'll work with, relationships and entrepreneurs because, that makes sense to me and that seems easier. I still had to do some of my own healing work to recover from Hell Yeah. And then I got to the other side of that and went, actually, I can't even share part of my life because it makes no sense to talk about my kids and the
yeah,
struggle we have here with the kids if I'm focused on relationships and entrepreneurs. So
yeah.
I had to kind of, I burnt out trying to do it. I'm like, okay, all
Mm,
right, stop. Hold off for a second. What does my heart really want me to do? What is my purpose in all
yeah,
this?
yeah.
And that's when it
Mm,
really hit me. It's like, no, I've done the healing work. I am best equipped, both personal experience and professional experience, to help other couples just like us, but who don't have the strength in their relationship or still have a lot of their own personal baggage that's
mm.
getting in the way.
Or
Not
even like
all in
if they,
survival mode.
or even like if they have, I don't know, a strong relationship, maybe it helps them to get through hardship faster,
Yeah, it
right?
does.
Or I don't
It's
know, the
knowing how to
pile
do
of,
that.
yeah, or the pile of broken glass is like not as tall, not as high as it was with your, or like
And
any
we
kind
all
of
go through,
improvement. Yeah,
yeah, we all go through our challenges. Some are
yeah,
harder than others. Mine was, for me, quite significant, but there are others that go through, having their kid with cancer and all the hospital visits and the near deaths and all that's extremely traumatic for everybody involved. And
yeah,
it's extremely physically taxing. Being in hospital, we've been in
yeah.
hospital with Jack a number of times. He had pneumonia only a few months ago. Nothing's ever simple for him. So,
Yeah, that's the thing. It's really everyone has their own lug, like their own backpack, their own luggage to carry. And
absolutely. And if I can help, I would love if I could significantly lower the divorce and breakup rate for couples like us because for me, I feel like, the people that need the stable and happy home and a good solid relationship
hmm,
are the people that have the most struggles, which is us. And
yeah,
our kids, our kids need a stable and happy home where mum and dad are happy together because
uh,
they struggle so much. And even the thought of being a solo parent with these kids with their needs, I'm like, I don't even know how I would deal with it. And there are
mm,
plenty of single parents out there because their relationship couldn't survive the struggles.
yeah,
And they're doing it now even harder on their own. And I
yeah.
feel for them. I really feel for them because now they're trying to find a new partner who will take on the load of these kids, and that's not easy. It takes
No,
the
if you're
same
throwing it,
type
it's like you sort of have to, I mean, you and your husband, you grew with it, right? Like you're not,
yeah,
so I think that's a big difference as well.
yeah, massively. But because I had the tools, because I had the knowledge,
Yeah, I
because
mean,
I
yeah,
was a
I mean,
coach,
you work in self development, you had a lot of tools at your disposal.
and even in the depths of that, I found when I was struggling the most, I wasn't even reaching for my tools because I was
Mm.
so far depleted. I
The
needed to reach
survival.
out to other
Yeah.
people who had the
Yeah.
tools who could help me. So even me, with all of my skills and tools, I still
Mhm.
was not able to help myself in those
Yeah.
moments. I needed help.
Yeah.
I needed to reach out and get a coach. I needed someone who
Yeah.
could help me just deal with
Yes.
getting some kind of self care because that wasn't even entering the radar. All of that. So, for me, I even say to these parents, you need the help because you
Hmm.
cannot do it on your own. Even me with all of my
Yeah.
skills,
Yeah.
you
But
know,
I
you,
love how even in like how hard, like how the hell year just really inspired such beautiful meaning of like, hey, if there's one, even one couple less that's getting divorced because they don't know how to handle life, like such a highly unpredictable life
I,
and medical needs, special needs, like
yeah,
that's well worth it. So I feel that's so beautiful, and that's really taking something you've experienced that was so hard. As you've said, hard is not even the right word, but we have no words
I know.
to cover it, and to really kind of go through that and at the end see, hey, there was something, there was a purpose, there
Yeah.
was a there was something, I took something from it that wasn't all just guts and bad. It
No,
was
there was a lot of good stuff. Like I learned
mm,
to trust myself more. I learned
mm,
that, you know, my kids show me all the time how to be more present.
mm.
Jackson in particular, this year. Jackson, he because of his struggles, you know, every little thing, we don't celebrate the milestones. And I heard this from another special needs parent. We don't celebrate the milestones, we celebrate the inch stones, because to us they are
Mm,
milestones for him.
yes,
So we learn to
that's
appreciate and
beautiful.
see his development at his
Mm,
speed in the way that he's doing it. As the
mm,
most magical thing is when he picked up a pen and started even just putting it to the paper, because he never
yeah,
did that before. You know,
yeah,
if
you need a
he
different ruler with if
a very different ruler. So he's helped us to learn to appreciate the littlest things, but not just that. I mean, being put into the neurodiverse world, we've had to learn a whole new language and understand capacity. And
yeah,
I had to throw
yeah,
my old parenting book out the window. I'm like, I've had to relearn how to parent
yeah,
kids who don't
yeah,
fit the mold, which has also helped me to learn, you know, I'm also neurodiverse. I'm like, okay, all right, now I understand. I totally get this. And I'm seeing some of their struggles in me.
yeah.
Um, so, you know, it's been a huge journey, a humbling journey.
Mm.
There's a lot of joy in that as well. I mean, he loves it when it rains. For him, it's magical water falling from the sky.
Oh,
So
that's so
we get
precious.
enjoyment in watching him
Mm.
jump up and down just playing in the rain. And
Yeah.
living in Queensland where it's a lot warmer, he can do that most of the year. Um,
Yay.
it's the
Yeah.
simple things that we start to appreciate, because
Mm.
these kids struggle with so much,
Yeah.
and so much compassion when they're struggling and they're having, you know, what looks like a
Yeah.
tantrum. We know is just their behavior is telling us they're not coping.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
just a cue they're giving us. I love that. We should do that on the scenic route too, in business, that we're not celebrating milestones. We're celebrating every inch stone. I really love that very much.
But I am going to have to go now because someone
Yes.
is ready for a
Yes,
bottle.
Rach, thank you so much for talking to me, for sharing
Thank
your
you for having me.
story. I will tell everyone who is listening a bit more than about your relationship survival guide you brought with you. But I'm gonna let you go now and go take care
All
of your
right.
little one. And
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
have
Thank
a
you for the
most
time.
magical day.
You too.
Take care. Bye.
Okay.